Good evening, and thank you all so much for coming to join us tonight at the Louise B. Raggio Lecture Series. My name is Jennifer Collins, and I am very proud to be the new Dean of SMU Dedman School of Law. Thank you. Before I introduce our special guest, I want to thank some very important people who made tonight possible. First, I would like to recognize Louise's family. We are very grateful to all your family and friends for the generous contribution that makes fascinating educational events like this available to our law students and the larger community. Would the Raggio family please stand and be recognized? I'd like to thank the amazing team at SMU Dedman School of Law for helping make this event a reality tonight. The students, the faculty, and most important, our development team. Would our Associate Dean of Development, Lynn Bozales, and her fantastic team please stand and be recognized for all you did to bring tonight's event together. It is an incredible honor to stand before you at a lecture series named for our trailblazing alum, Louise Raggio, who, as you just heard, was shattering glass ceilings 60 years ago. Among other amazing firsts, Louise was the first female assistant district attorney in Dallas. Thanks to her efforts and the efforts of all the strong women of her generation, tonight we are able to welcome Dallas's first female district attorney, the Honorable Susan Hawk. Susan Hawk is a Dallas native who received her undergraduate degree from Texas Tech University and her JD from what was then known as Texas Wesleyan University School of Law. Ms. Hawk became first an assistant district attorney and was quickly promoted to deputy chief of the Child Abuse Division. The Greater Dallas Crime Commission named Ms. Hawk the Prosecutor of the Year for her protection of child abuse victims. After moving over to the bench, Ms. Hawk was elected 3 times to serve as a judge of the 291st Criminal District Court, and the Dallas Observer named her the Best Rookie Judge of the Year in 2003. On the bench for nearly a decade, Judge Hawk handled more than 35,000 cases and became known for her stance on violent crimes. She also instituted important initiatives to reduce recidivism rates, like the True Liberty and Success Program, an intervention program for nonviolent offenders with a history of mental illness. This past year, Judge Hawk ran for district attorney and ultimately defeated the incumbent to become the first female in Dallas's history to hold the position. She has only been on the job about 3 months, but she is already holding town hall meetings and working on initiatives like repairing relationships with communities that have lost trust in law enforcement. Please join me in welcoming our attorney, District Attorney Susan Hawk. We thought it might be more interesting to have an informal conversation with tonight. So that's the format that we're going to use, where we're going to give Susan a chance to talk a little bit about what has brought her to her position today. I thought we would start with, it's obviously been a challenging week. And is there anything that you would like to tell the folks in the audience about the past week?
Well, yes, it's been a very challenging week, but I'm very excited to be here tonight and get to talk about the good things that we have been doing and what we are doing at the Dallas County District Attorney's Office, and talk about the great folks that I work with, what our vision is, and I think the one lesson or the most important thing that I know, that when you stand on the truth, you never fall down.
We have so many law students tonight who can only dream of having the wonderful career path that you've had, and I would love for them to hear a little bit about how you got to where you are today. Can you tell us first a little bit about where you grew up and how it was you decided you wanted to go to law school?
Well, I was born here in Dallas, and we moved to Arlington, Texas when I was 4 years old. And Arlington was kind of considered a small town there. And we have any folks that listen to The Ticket in here? Mm-hmm. Yeah? So I moved into a neighborhood that was called, it was Interlochen was the name of the neighborhood, and it's a new subdivision, and there was a few houses. And my very first friend in the world was Corby Davison, for those of you that listen to Corby on the ticket. So he's kind of a celebrity here in Dallas. He's a radio host on the ticket. And I grew up in a neighborhood where it was all boys. So, I grew up in the 70s. I was a child of the 70s and the 80s. Is when you came home from school, you rode your bikes, we played in the creek. We went home when the street lights came on. And so I can say from very early on, I can tell you that I had a father that was very important to me, and every single day in my life, I can remember him telling me that I can be whatever I want to be, from the age of 8 years old on. So being a girl never made a difference to me.
So why did the girl who could do anything decide being a lawyer was the right path?
Well, it was interesting because I went to undergrad. First, I went to TCU my first year, so I graduated from Lamar High School, 1988. And I went to TCU my first year, and I realized that Arlington and Fort Worth are about 15 minutes apart. And so I decided my sophomore year to transfer to Texas Tech in Lubbock, Texas, and I graduated from Tech in December of 1992. And I had a major in psychology, minor in English. I was going to continue on and get my PhD in psychology. I planned to do that. And we had a family friend. His name was Ray Waddell, and he was the dean of admissions for a new law school. And at that time, DFW was the DFW School of Law, and then Texas Wesleyan had purchased the law school, and he was the new dean of admissions. He called my mom, said, would Susan be interested in going into law school? This was December 1992. I was graduating in 2 weeks. I said, sure. And as you know, luck would have it, there was a LSAT in Lubbock that weekend. This was a call on a Tuesday. There was an LSAT on the weekend. I went to take the LSAT, and I was so prepared that I thought there was math on the LSAT because I had not prepared for it because I did not know that I was going to go to law school at that point. I took the LSAT. I was in law school January 3rd. So this whole process took about 3 weeks, and I would say it was definitely fate. I started Texas Wesleyan in January of 1993, and I graduated from there in 2.5 years.
Now, students, I'm sure at SMU everyone loves it, but students at other law schools can have a mixed experience. Tell us about your law school experience. What was your favorite part? Was there anything that was perhaps less enjoyable?
Well, all I could say is that, I was coming from Texas Tech. Lubbock was a big university. And Texas Wesleyan, it was the first year that it was the accredited law school. And it was not in downtown Fort Worth at that point. It was actually in Irving off Grawwaller in an industrial district. It was their part-time building. So it was, at first when I drove up, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And I can tell you that I received a fantastic education. Many of the law school professors are still there. And it was, at that point, I didn't know what to expect. I started, midterm, and so I started in January. I went full-time that semester. I went full-time in the summer. Then I remember my second year I started, and my first class was criminal law. And immediately I knew that that's where I wanted to be, and that's where I wanted to focus my interest.
So as graduation is approaching, what do you decide to do next?
Well, a couple of things were happening at that time, and some of you might remember. There was two very big cases that were going on right when I was leaving college, Texas Tech, and I remember I was starting summer school, and it was the summer of 91, summer school 92. It was the Rodney King incident. And for those of you that remember, it was the Rodney King incident, which is our Ferguson at this time. And it was before social media, and it was when you had the news and the newspaper and the magazines, and that's where you got your information. And I remember being in summer school in Lubbock, Texas, and watching this, and watching 4 police officers brutally beat an African-American gentleman, and it was all on TV, and everyone saw it. And I remember following that, and this was before I even had an interest in law school, and I remember just being so incensed by all of it. I remember in 92, I remember it was May of 92, I believe, or the end of April, when a LA jury acquitted the 4 police officers, and what happened, how the riots that broke out afterwards. And just, I remember the feeling I had about all of it, and it's something that drew me in, and it was something that I wanted to do something about, be a part of, and understand why these things were happening. So once I went to law school, there was another case some of you might remember, and that was O.J. Simpson, 1994. That was a case that everyone was watching, and I remember watching that case every single day for 9 months, and watching every commentary about from the prosecution to the defense, and it was just, I knew that criminal law was where I wanted to focus my attention, and I knew immediately I wanted to be a prosecutor.
So happenstance in some ways brought you to the law school. How did you get your first job in the prosecutor's office?
Well, it was my second year I completed, and Texas Wesleyan was a brand new law school. So John Vance was the district attorney at that point, and they were, it was a brand new accredited law school, so they weren't hiring many new folks from Texas Wesleyan at that point. They had one open intern position available for Texas Wesleyan. It paid $5.07 an hour. And I applied for it, and I called them every day until they gave me the job. And I interned at the Dallas County District Attorney's Office in the appellate division. And then I went and whoever found out who was in charge of the interns, and I said, can I volunteer somewhere else? And I volunteered in the 291st Criminal District Court that summer, which later was the court that I presided over. And then I stayed there the whole second year until they gave me a job. I made sure that John Vance, Judge Vance, who was the DA, saw my face every day so he'd have to hire me. So,
now you ended up doing some of the most difficult and challenging cases that anyone involved in the criminal justice system can handle, child abuse cases. How did that become your specialty?
well, actually, the third year of law school, I started interning in the child abuse division. And this was in 1994, 95. And which is very different than what it is now. The Child Abuse Division, the District Attorney's Office, has the most fantastic prosecutors. They have all the resources available. They work with law enforcement. But back then, it was a very different story. Back then, it was a place that prosecutors were sent if they wanted so they would quit. Back then, it was a place where they would stay for a 6-month stint, and they would ask to get moved out. And it was unfortunate because things were different then. And it was a place that I asked to go, and I stayed 5.5 years. And I am proud to say that I now work alongside some of the very best prosecutors that are still in my office, that are administrative chiefs that I met when they were child abuse prosecutors with me. And so I was there for 5.5 years. It was one of the biggest blessings in my life to get to be a part of that.
As you and I have talked about, I too am a former prosecutor, and some of the cases that I tried have stayed with me to this day.
Yes.
Do you have any of those experiences, some cases that still remember you and guide the kind of work that you do now?
I was thinking about that, thinking about what I was going to talk about here tonight. I mean, the emotional challenges when you face or you try these type of cases, they never leave you, they stay with you. Just the preparation for these. There was 3 different cases that always come to mind, that always stand out. That's something that I think about almost weekly. One involved a case, and many of you may remember, but it was a little girl that had been locked in the closet for 7 years in Hutchins, Texas. It was one of the last cases I prosecuted as a child abuse prosecutor. The defendant's name was Barbara Atkinson. She and her husband, Kenneth Atkinson, were prosecuted. I prosecuted Barbara Atkinson along with Patricia Hogue. And it was, the facts of the case received national attention because you couldn't even imagine that a woman and her husband, who was a stepfather, could commit these kind of acts. Actually, they had placed the little girl up for adoption. They fought to get her back when she was 2 years old. And there was a technicality, she came back home, and then they locked her in the closet for 7 years. They lived in a trailer in Hutchins, Texas. They starved her. They did terrible things to her. And what stood out and what I will never forget is when they were arrested, and the way that the case came to light is that Kenneth Atkinson went to a neighbor and said that, basically confessed to what they had done, and took the neighbor back to the trailer, opened the closet door, and there was this sweet little girl that had been locked in there for 7 years. And I remember the way the neighbor described this sweet girl. She said that she looked like a monster. But then she came out into the light, and she said, I will never forget when the police were called, the police arrived, they started taking pictures of her, and she smiled for the camera. And this was a little child who had been brutally just tormented for 7 years, and when the police came and they took a picture, she smiled for the camera. And I never forget when that testimony unfolded in the courtroom, the jury, the witnesses, the one thing I think everyone took away from that is that no matter what happens to you in life, sometimes you just cannot break someone's spirit. And it was very powerful. There was another case that I tried. The individual was the name of Juan Lira, and he received 2 life sentences. I prosecuted the case in front of Justice Molly Francis. And it stands out to me is that he had sexually assaulted his 2 daughters most of their life, and it was his biological daughters. And he had decided that right before trial, if it wasn't hard enough on them to have to walk into a courtroom in front of a bunch of strangers and talk about the horrific things that he had done, he decided he was going to represent himself. So what that meant is that he had to cross-examine them. So they not only had to get on the witness stand, they had to face their father and talk about the things that had happened. And I will never forget one of the little girls, what she said. She looked him straight in the face and said, "I don't know why you're asking me these questions. I don't know why you're lying. You know what you did to me." And I mean, she was all of 9 years old and stood up. And I mean, these types of cases, you think about, these are children that are so resilient. And the things that we complain about, you can pretty much get through anything when you know that they can do that. So it was a blessing. It was a gift to be a part of that. It was a gift and a privilege when Juan Liris received 2 life sentences. He deserves every day of it. So being part of that as a prosecutor was one of the reasons and why I'm proud to be the district attorney.
Now, eventually you moved over to the bench, and not every prosecutor wants to make that leap because sometimes you want to be in there trying the cases and not listening to other people try them in front of you. Why did you decide to make that move?
Well, sometimes that's a hard transition as well, because I was 31 years old when I ran for judge. And you know, it's such a privilege to get to be here and see Lorraine. Lorraine and I were prosecutors together. And so she was in the Lorraine Raggio, she was in the specialized crime division. I was in the district attorney's office, and child abuse, and walk by her office every single day and visit with her. And you know, when I decided to run, I was 31 years old, and back then it was Judge Jerry Meyer was the presiding judge. And she had been a judge for 20 years, and that was when judges were on the bench for 20 years, and the benches did not become open. So I jumped at an opportunity because I had just tried this Barbara Atkinson case and thought it was the right time to make that move, and I never looked back.
What did you consider to be the most rewarding aspects of being a judge, and what were the most difficult parts of that job?
I think as a judge, one of the most rewarding things, and I've had some fantastic mentors along the way. And you know, they've always given me one lines that I hang on to all the time. And I remember it said, you have an opportunity every single day to help somebody. And I was in a great position to be able to do that. I see Judge Parker here today. I mean, and she's a fantastic judge, and Judge Sheldon I see, who's been a friend of mine along the way, and different judges that I know that have done this, and they work with individuals, and you see that if you're given this opportunity, you need to make the most of it and try to help someone. It was a great responsibility. As a judge, I was a criminal court judge, so I presided over only felony cases. So that would be everything from your low-level drug case all the way up to capital murder and everything in between. And in Texas, the range of punishment you will have, who's all taken criminal law here yet? Criminal procedure, law student, yes. The range of punishment that you have available to you is unbelievable. I mean, for a first-degree felony, you can give anyone anywhere from deferred probation to 5 to 99 years of life, or everything in between. And that's your responsibility job as a judge to give that punishment, or to weigh all those things and take those things into consideration. So it was a balance. But I think one of the biggest challenges that I noticed, you know, it's hard when you've been in the game and you've been a prosecutor and you're an advocate to switch hats and realize that you're only a referee and you're calling balls and strikes. But I think that as I have seen, and my colleagues that I know down at the criminal courthouse as well have taken on different roles and become advocates for the criminal justice system by different innovative programs that they have created and participate in.
I asked you when you were a prosecutor if there are any cases that have really stayed with you and made you be the kind of attorney that you are today. Are there any cases from your time as a judge that have had that kind of impact on you?
Well, I think there's many cases, and I can tell you, it doesn't matter how many capital murder cases you preside over. It doesn't matter how many times. I never presided over a death penalty case, and the way that worked is the state of Texas, the DA at the time, decides whether or not they are going to seek death on a capital murder case, and it would be randomly assigned to a court, and it was never assigned to the 291st. But I did preside over many capital murder cases, and it's to understand that you are the one, after a jury has found an individual guilty, and you are the one that assess a life sentence. It never becomes easy. I tell you, the hardest thing for me, what I saw day in and day out, is the victims' families and the defendants' families. You watch them in the courtroom, and you watch how these things unfold, and you can feel their pain, and you can feel the agony that they go through, and that, I can tell you, I can't ever remember that ever getting easy, and it never will.
You have done some amazing work to help people in the criminal justice system with mental illness in particular. Can you tell us a little bit about those efforts, and is that something that you hope to continue in your new role?
Well, I was 9 months into my first term. It was apparent to me, and about 25 to 30% of the individuals that were coming in front of me were diagnosed with mental illness. They were diagnosed with schizophrenic, bipolar, major depressive disorder, and I would say 95% of them were abusing drugs. And what we were doing at that time, in 2003, there really wasn't any resources available out there. There were some, but there wasn't any as far as diversion programs. Judge John Crezeau had created a drug divert program at that point, and I modeled a mental health divert program after his program as well. And what we did is we identified the highest risk offenders that were probationers. They were all felony probationers, already on felony probation. And these were the individuals that judges or the prosecutors that were handling the cases didn't know whether, they didn't want to send these individuals to prison because we knew they were sick, but we had to do something. So they were either getting 2 to 5 years in the penitentiary or they were being placed on probation without any services. So I jumped at an opportunity to create a felony mental health divert program for these individuals. And we identified the 60 highest risk offenders that were on probation. And what happened is they would come, this was on a Monday afternoon, this was aside from my regular job. We created a staff, the state of Texas provided a grant, and these individuals would come see me every single week. We would provide them, they had a full-time case manager, they had a forensic psychiatrist that they saw, they had a probation officer, they had a public defender that was assigned to them, and we were a staff. We named the court the Atlas Mental Health Court. Any of you that are involved in the profession, in the mental health profession, they love acronyms. So it was an acronym that we named Achieving True Liberty and Success, Atlas. And it was a one-stop shop for these probationers, for these individuals. And they would come every single week, and it was the judicial monitoring, I believe, that was key to the success, because these were individuals that were looking at a lot of time in the penitentiary. They were on probation for aggravated robbery, aggravated assault against a family member. They were looking at 2 to 20 years in the penitentiary, 5 to 99 years of life in the penitentiary. They understood if they messed up, that there was, they could be in serious trouble and go to the pen, and that would be it. And it was a conversation that I would have with them. And we provided them services that they needed. We gave them the medication that they needed. We provided housing, vocational training. But what we did that was different is we worked together as a team. You would think as a judge, you're the one that makes the final decision. You are. But the decisions I made in that program was based on a collaboration of all these individuals that participated in the staff. We would staff these cases every single Monday, and they would come in and they would tell me whether or not they had used drugs that week. Their case managers would let me know. If they were still remaining in the houses they were supposed to be remaining in, whether they were taking their medication. I mean, we monitored them closely. And they participated in the program for 1 year. And many of these individuals that were in the program became like family members to me because I got to know them so well. I saw them every single week. I knew their dogs' names. I knew when, I knew if they'd made their doctor's appointments that week. I knew what their situation was going on at home. They would tell me, their family situations. And we would really help to try to provide the services that they needed and give them that opportunity. And we showed, the University of North Texas actually came and they conducted a study. And they followed the individuals that graduated my program for 2 years after they graduated. And they compared them to a comparison group of individuals that did not participate in the program, but they were still on felony probation. And we showed to have a 70% reduction in new arrests and a 67% reduction in recidivism. And we also showed that we saved the taxpayers in 5 years $13.5 million in incarceration cost. So being a part of that and being a part of that program, I think it's given me such a unique and different perspective being the district attorney, because I see this is an innovative way of approaching the criminal justice system. It's a different way of approaching the criminal justice system, and it works.
Now, I talked to a lot of young people today about what they view as their potential career path, and not a lot talk about public service for whatever reason. What made you decide, you're having a wonderful experience on the bench, what made you decide to take another leap and run for district attorney?
Well, sometimes it's when those individual or those opportunities that present themselves. And I think about when I was in law school, I think popular culture has shaped the law, the legal community in a huge way. Because I think about when I was in law school, the TV shows that I watched was LA, I'm dating myself big time here, but LA Law, the movies out where The Firm, it was when there are people on the fast track, they're making big money, you become managing partners. That's what a lot of folks went to law school, that's what you thought about. Now, I think with all the TV, Law and Order, CSI, all the different legal shows that are out now, I mean, criminal prosecution is a lot more appealing than it used to be in public service. And in 2000, I guess it was 2013, when I decided to step down and run for district attorney, it was because I really did have a front row seat to the evolution of the criminal justice system. And I watched what was happening. And I was able to participate in a program that I knew worked. And I was able to watch my colleagues, judges that were sitting on the bench that were creating these programs, and saw how they worked. And we couldn't keep doing the things the way we were doing them. You can't just keep building bigger prisons. We can't just keep sending individuals to the penitentiary and have a revolving door, because we're not doing anything that's making a dent in the criminal justice system at that point. And so I had a vision for what I saw. I had a vision for what I thought we could do at the district attorney's office. I had a lot of smart people around me that I talked to about these things. And I believe that instead of always looking at criminal prosecution on the tail end, what do we do at the DA's office? What does a prosecutor do? We react. I thought, why couldn't we do something different and be proactive? Why can't we start looking things on the front end? Why can't we start talking about crime prevention instead of prosecution? Why can't that be the mission of the district attorney's office? And I believe that that can work. I think number one and foremost how that works is the district attorney needs to be out in the community and listen to what all communities say. I'm not always going to agree, and they're not always going to get the answers that they want, but I feel like most importantly, when people feel like they're heard, it makes all the difference in the world. And that's when we understand, or I can understand from a criminal justice system aspect, what we can do different, what we can do better, are our communities safer, and how do we make our families feel safer.
Now, you made a very conscious decision about where to do your first town hall. What were some of the things that you heard?
Wow. Well, I think there was 43 questions that were asked in an hour and a half, so to say I was tired at the end is an understatement. But I am one of the things I heard, and I can tell you this, one of the first things I did when I took office January 1st, on January 29th, I believe was the date, I met with and I had a breakfast for every single police chief in Dallas County. And they came down to the district attorney's office. A month later, I had a breakfast for every single city manager and mayor in Dallas County. And I went around the table and I asked each and every one of them, what is the issue that you have been having with the district attorney's office in the past? What can we do to make your job easier? What can we make your job to feel like you are representing the community that you represent safer? The one thing that I heard time and time again was communication. There was not communication that did not exist between the district attorney's office at that time and police agencies. And we partner with police agencies. I support the police agencies. We work with them. And once again, like I've said, we're not always going to agree, but I'm going to support them. And just to start opening the lines of communication and start talking with them, I think was a huge step in the right direction. And so when I went into the town hall meeting, because in light of Ferguson and all these incidents that have occurred, that is the one concern that we talk about, are these officer-involved shootings. And I'm so glad that I see Don Guidry here. Don, stand up, please. Don Guidry. And I want to give him a round of applause. Because Don Guidry, he was a prosecutor that was assigned in my court when I was a judge, and he was a defense attorney. And then there was a civil rights position that was created by my predecessor, which was a good thing. And what this civil rights position does, and Mr. Guidry fills that spot as prosecutor, and we have an investigator that is assigned, is that when we have these officer-involved shootings, we have a separate team that goes out, and a separate check and balance, and separate from the law enforcement agency where the shooting has occurred. So that's the one thing I can tell you when I went through the first town hall meeting, the one issue that brought up time and time again, the one concern that we have is how do we start building trust between law enforcement and what's happening in the community right now. The chief of police came, Chief Brown was not there, but he brought a representative, and he stood up and talked about the good things that the law enforcement is doing. the good things that Dallas Police Department is doing in the community that people are not aware of. And it just started bridging that gap and just start communicating. And I can tell you that the response was great. Our second town hall meeting will be in April. We're going to Pleasant Grove. Third one will be in Garland, and I'm making my way all the way around the county. And I don't make any promises that I can't keep. I can tell you that. I do say that I will always listen. And that's what I try to do.
How have you seen the legal profession evolve over the course of your career? And do you have any predictions, I know this is hard, about how it's going to evolve, continue to evolve in the future?
Well, I will say the one thing that I will talk about how it's evolved is I think the role that women have in the criminal justice system, and I'm not going to play the woman card here, but I'm going to talk about it for just a second. As you can see that, it's such an honor to be able to sit on the stage and speak to you all, and in honor of, Louise Raggio, when you watch the video, when you watch the things that she has accomplished, it's unbelievable. Another individual was Sarah T. Hughes, who was the first district court judge, the first federal district court judge. She was the individual that swore in LBJ. And many people don't know about Judge Sarah T. Hughes, who was here in Dallas, is that she paid her way through law school by working as a police officer during the day in the 30s. She was a police officer during the day in the 30s, and she went to law school at night. And she didn't wear a badge, she didn't wear a gun, she just went into the community, and where she spent her time was working with female prostitutes, working with runaways. And really, she was talking about, in the 30s, about rehabilitation, and she was ahead of her time. And not that, I think, with that, I think as a woman, you have sometimes a unique perspective that we bring that is empathy and compassion. And I feel like that's the one thing that I've noticed. I think that we're evolving a little bit in the criminal justice system. Not that that's characteristics that men do not have, but I hope that as the first female district attorney, we can start looking at these different things and evolve in that direction.
Now, we gave our law students the chance to submit some questions, so I want to be sure to get to a few of these. What do you look for when you make hiring decisions?
Okay, I knew we were going to get there, right?
What should students be doing to prepare themselves who are interested in going into criminal justice, either as a prosecutor or a defense attorney or potentially a judge one day?
Well, I had the privilege of sitting in our first group of hires. So we had 8 spots that were open, and I sat in all the interviews during the interview process. This was the first month in January. And I can tell you, it is amazing to me, and I will say this, the law students, the interviews, every single one of them were great. And I'm not just saying that, were fantastic. The confidence that these law students have and their ability at this point is unbelievable to me. One thing that I look at if hiring for the district attorney's office is something, I think you go to work for the DA's office because you want to serve your community. And I think public service is something that's important. And the individuals that we hired and we looked at, these were individuals that had served their community in some way through college, through law school, showed a real interest in it. There's some things that I think that are all within us, but you can't teach. That's good judgment. That's one thing we look for, good judgment, curiosity, compassion, empathy. Those are all the different traits that we looked at when we talked to these folks. We would ask certain questions. We brought up certain case law, what they thought about Brady, and if those of you that studied that in law school, and what their take was on those issues. And it was interesting to listen to what their different perspectives were. But I think that if you're going to work for the district attorney's office, the one thing that's important to me, if you want to come and be a prosecutor, is that you're coming there for the right reasons. I think back in the day, a lot of folks use it as a stepping stone, but I think many folks that I have seen and everyone that we hired and everyone that we interviewed was there because they wanted to serve their community.
That is so interesting. Eric Holder hired me for my first job as a prosecutor. Some of you may have heard of him. He's gone on to bigger and better things. And his first question in the interview process was, what kind of community service do you do on a regular basis? Because I think he was looking...
And community service meant you weren't on probation at that time either.
That told me that.
Very important too.
But that you had walked the walk before you tried to come to the prosecutor's office. This, I thought, was a great and insightful law student question. What advice would you have for law students just beginning their career, no matter what field they're going to pursue? Is there anything you wish you had known that you know now that you wish you had known when you were just starting out?
Oh, gosh. One thing I wish I'd known now is I think one thing I have learned, And I think if you become a lawyer, and when you're training to become a lawyer, how many lawyers do we have in the room? Okay,
Oh,
we got
gosh.
a lot of them, right?
No one slip and fall on the way
So,
out.
I think that, you think about the different perspective you get in law school, and I think it starts even in your first year of you're trained to think differently. Especially lawyers that marry lawyers, not always the easy thing. You're trained to confront, you're trained to think differently. And I think the one lesson that I've learned is you're also, I think if you have your instincts, trust your gut. Trust your gut. It never steers you wrong. It's probably the best advice I can give.
You mentioned that you've had some powerful mentors over the course of your career. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you feel they've impacted you, and if there's any advice in particular that stands out that you've gotten from a mentor?
What I can say about that is that seize every opportunity that you have, because I've had some great opportunities. I've had random incidents that have turned out to be life-changing, and I'll give you an example. In 1994, I was invited to go to a Cowboy game. Or I was an intern at the DA's office. I was set up on a blind date. I'm maybe giving y'all too many details here. I was invited to go to a Cowboy game, and I went. And then I ended up sitting next to two individuals, and I didn't know them very well, but they were fantastic individuals. They were older than me, and it ended up being two gentlemen by the name of Judge Joe Kendall and Jim Roth. Jim Roth was prior U.S. attorney here. Judge Joe Kendall was a former federal judge, and they have continued to be my mentors today. This was back when I was 24 years ago at a Cowboy game, and I got advice from them 2 weeks ago. And I have sought advice from them throughout my entire career. Jim Roth is one, if any of those that he's someone, when I first ran for judge, I was 31 years old, and many folks said to me, "You're too young. Who do you think you are going to run for a district bench? You're too young. You need to run for a county court at law bench first, then you run for a felony bench." And I remember I thought to myself, well, I want to run for a felony bench. And Jim Roth said to me, then you run for a felony bench, and you know you're going to win, and you believe it every single day, and you never look back. And those are people that have touched me along the way, and I will never forget them. Joe Kendall's someone that I've known. There's different individuals. Dan Haygood, if he's here. Dan, some of you might know Dan Haygood. I was a prosecutor in the DA's office as an intern when I was interns, and I was signed to his court. These are great minds in the legal community that luck has put me in their path, and I took every opportunity, and I feel so blessed to have them part of my life.
I know the DA's office has an active Facebook and Twitter account. Is social media something that you think can help the district attorney's office in its efforts to serve the community, or?
Well, and I think talking about that, and one of the things that we talk about, and I think a real shift in how I want the district attorney's office, our vision for the office is we want to put out positive information. We want to talk about the good things that we're doing, because I can tell you right now, there's a lot of good things that we've started and a lot of great initiatives that we're starting and we will continue to do. And I think social media, that's just, this day and age, it's important. But I want to continue to put out the positive information that we're doing and let the community know that I think when folks think about what the district attorney's office does, what the DA does, what the prosecutor does, the first thing you think to yourself is you're putting individuals in prison. And mind you, there are individuals who commit crimes, and I'm saying this time and time again. You commit a violent crime, you stick a gun in someone's face, you commit family violence, you commit crimes against our children. There's individuals that belong in prison, and they deserve to be prosecuted, and the punishment should fit the crime. But there's also a group of individuals who continually just hurt themselves, and how do we identify them, and what can we do to help? And try to shut somewhat that revolving door and make a difference. Because I think that's when we start talking about crime prevention. Prosecution, absolutely. Like I said again, there's individuals who belong in prison for the crimes that they commit. But there's a large group that we can do and we can make a difference. And how do we identify those? And that's when we start talking about crime prevention.
I think this question stems from the fact that being a law student is stressful, and obviously many of the positions that you've had carry their own stresses. How do you achieve work-life balance? How do you sort of leave the job behind and able to sort of function?
I'm working on that. And I think that's something important to address. That's something to talk about. And I encourage every single law student is in here, make that a habit now. You know, one thing that I have not done that I will say that I've gotten away from is I exercised every day. And I got away from that because, you get busy and you make an excuse, and that's something that you have to do if it's something that achieves that balance. There's certain things that you need to recognize that in order to be the most productive that you can in your job, then you have to let it go.
What legacy do you hope to leave? At the end of the day, what do you hope people are saying about Susan Hawk?
I think with anything, change is difficult. Change is very difficult when there's old habits, there's the old way of doing things. The legacy that I hope to leave behind is I believe the criminal justice system is evolving. And I have been down at the criminal courthouse for 20 years, and I've had the privilege to take away some of the immediate past and some of the far past, the good parts of that. And what my legacy and what my goal and what my vision is take those good parts of the criminal justice system that I learned and then move it forward. And moving it forward means talking about these things, innovative justice practice. Stop talking about criminal prosecution on the tail end, and what can we do on the front end? Because when we start looking at it on the front end is when we bring about real change. And people always talk about being the first female district attorney. It is an honor. It is a privilege. And when I read about Sarah T. Hughes and I read about Louise Raggio, and to be standing up here and being in your presence as well about strong women, it is a responsibility. It's my duty to be the very best that I can be. But what I want to be remembered for is not being the first female district attorney, but someone that did everything they can to bring about real change to evolve the criminal justice system in the right direction.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are so grateful we had this opportunity.